The single sterile chime of the phone cut through the warm, spice-scented air of the kitchen. It was the only sound that didn't belong. On the heavy oak table before me, nestled in tissue paper and twine, were 6 small jars of fig preserves, each bearing a handwritten label, "For the Bayou." My hands, sticky from the sealing wax, hovered over the last jar. For 3 years, this trip to the Louisiana wetlands, a sprawling, historic mansion booked for the whole family, had been my singular focus. It was more than a vacation. It was a pilgrimage, a promise I had made to my late husband, Richard. The phone chimed again, insistent. I wiped my hands on my apron and picked it up. A message from my son, Leo. The words glowed with a cold blue light, stark against the cozy dimness of my Savannah home. "Sophia feels it's better this way, a trip for her family. Your contribution is appreciated, but your presence isn't required." I read it once, then a second time. My breath caught somewhere in my throat, a sharp, painful knot. Her family, not our family, not the family I had built, nurtured, and now apparently merely financed. I had just finished securing the last of the funds, selling the antique woodworking tools Richard had cherished, the ones that still smelled faintly of sawdust and his patient, steady hands. Every dollar, every sacrifice, every whispered dream of seeing my grandchildren catch fireflies under the Spanish moss had culminated in this, a dismissal, a 10-word invoice for my own erasure. The phone went dark. I didn't reply. I couldn't. I stared at my reflection in the black screen, a woman with flour on her cheek and a ghost in her eyes. Leo didn't call. He didn't offer a clumsy lie or a softened blow, just the quiet, brutal efficiency of a digital guillotine, severing me from a story I thought I was writing. I was the benefactor, the silent partner, the foundation upon which their memories would be built, and I was expected to crumble away quietly once my purpose was served. I had sensed the ground shifting beneath me for years, a slow continental drift I had refused to acknowledge. It wasn't one single event, but 1,000 tiny erosions of belonging. It was the way Sophia, my daughter-in-law, would correct my stories about the early days in Savannah with a tight, patronizing smile. "Oh, Eleanor, you always embellish," she'd say, her voice as sweet as poisoned honey, right in front of the children. It was the holidays that quietly migrated to her mother's pristine, modern home, news of which would only reach me a day or two before, a casual afterthought. But the most telling sign was the way Sophia looked at me. It wasn't with malice or contempt. It was worse. She looked past me, her gaze sliding over me as if I were a piece of well-worn furniture, a familiar but ultimately unremarkable part of the scenery. I was a relic in my own life. Still, I never believed Leo would be her accomplice. The boy who wrote me sprawling, heartfelt poems for my birthday, who once brought me a bouquet of wilting dandelions and declared me the most beautiful woman in the world, the man who for years after he moved away would call me just to describe the color of the sunset. He was the keeper of my heart's history. I still had the crayon drawing he'd made in kindergarten, a portrait of me with a lopsided crown, captioned, "My Queen Mom." Now, it seemed, I had been deposed. My gaze fell upon the small, elegant suitcase resting by the door. Inside were 2 linen dresses I'd saved for, a photograph of Richard laughing, his head thrown back in the sunlight, and a small tin of the chicory coffee he had loved. I had imagined brewing it on the first morning in that grand old house, the aroma filling the wide, airy rooms. I had pictured us on the wraparound porch, rocking in wicker chairs, my grandson asking, "Did Grandpa Richard like coffee this strong?" And I would say, "He liked everything in his life to be strong, my love, especially his family." But that scene would never play out. It was a fiction I had sold to myself. I had paid for the antebellum mansion with its sweeping verandas. I had booked the flights. I had arranged for the Creole cooking class, the swamp tour, the jazz club reservations. I had spent hours on the phone with the property manager ensuring the Wi-Fi was strong enough for Sophia's parents to work if needed, and that the garden was free of any plants that might trigger my granddaughter's allergies. And now I was a transaction that had been completed. The ATM that had dispensed the cash was now expected to power down. I sat in the deepening shadows of my kitchen for a long time. The grandfather clock in the hall chimed 11, then midnight. I didn't move to turn on a light. For a fleeting, shameful moment, it wasn't anger or even sadness that washed over me, but a profound and hollow foolishness, the kind that comes from hoping too much, from believing love was a currency that could never be devalued. I thought about calling him, my fingers even ghosting over the phone. But what would I say? You hurt me. He knew that. You've changed. He had made that perfectly clear. Please, let me come. I could not. I would not beg for a place at a table I had set myself. So instead, I stood, my joints protesting, and walked to the small study where I kept my laptop. The screen blinked to life, a familiar, comforting glow. I opened the folder labeled Louisiana Legacy Fund, and there it was, the sum total of my quiet sacrifices, of skipped lunches with friends and patched-up cardigans, of lonely nights tutoring history students online when my eyes burned with fatigue. $32,450.99. It had started with a dusty mason jar hidden behind the flower canisters, a place I called my dream jar. Every small indulgence I denied myself, a new novel, a trip to the cinema, my favorite Earl Grey tea, the money went into the jar. Pennies became dollars, and dollars grew into a quiet, stubborn mountain of hope. I had done it all for a memory, for one perfect, shimmering moment where my family was whole again, held together by the ghost of a love that had started it all. Richard and I had honeymooned in the Louisiana countryside. We were young, impossibly broke, and deliriously in love. We'd stayed in a rundown motel and spent our days driving aimlessly down roads curtained with Spanish moss, listening to the cicadas sing. He'd tried to teach me how to fish for crawdads in a muddy creek and ended up falling in himself, emerging covered in mud and laughing so hard he couldn't breathe. That laughter was the sound I was chasing. I wanted to give it back to my son. I wanted Leo to feel the same humid air on his skin that his father once had, to stand in a place where our family's story had truly begun. Maybe it would tether him again, remind him of who loved him first. So I planned. I researched historic homes that could house all 9 of us. I chose one with a grand fireplace, imagining us gathered around it, each saying a word to describe Richard. I'd pictured silence, then tears, then laughter. Mostly, I had pictured being seen, being thanked, being held. But somewhere along the way, I had become invisible. I saw it in the family photographs. It started subtly. Sophia would say, "Let's get one of just the kids." Then, "Now one of just our little family unit." By the time they were done, the moment had passed, and the camera was put away. At Christmas, they all wore matching emerald green sweaters. I hadn't known there was a color scheme. Leo had brushed it off with a casual, "Oh, you're not into that stuff, Mom." But I was. I just wasn't asked. The text wasn't a mistake or a miscommunication. It was the final, logical step in a long and calculated campaign of exclusion. Your contribution is appreciated, but your presence isn't required. Every skipped cup of tea, every night spent in a cold house with the thermostat turned down, every hour spent staring at a screen until my vision blurred. It all felt like a fool's errand. I hadn't been building a bridge to my family. I had been constructing a pedestal for them, one they had no intention of letting me stand on. They didn't want my stories or my memories. They just wanted my money, and now that the transaction was complete, I was to vanish. That night, I unpacked my suitcase. I placed the tin of chicory coffee on the counter, and set Richard's laughing photograph beside it. Then I sat in the stillness and asked myself the question no mother should ever have to whisper into the dark. When did I become a liability to the family I built from scratch? The morning after the text, I woke to a house that felt cavernous and unnervingly silent. I moved through the rooms like a phantom, straightening picture frames that were already perfectly aligned, folding a throw blanket that was already neat. Later that afternoon, while sorting through my email, I saw it. The subject line was innocuous. Final itinerary, the Devereaux Estate. Family passage. It was from the luxury travel concierge I had hired. I clicked it open. A meticulously detailed schedule appeared. Flight numbers, check-in times for the mansion, swamp tour reservations, dinner bookings at a famed New Orleans restaurant, rental car confirmations. My eyes scanned the passenger manifest, a sick, cold dread pooling in my stomach. There were 8 names: Leo, Sophia, their 2 children, Sophia's parents, Sophia's brother, his girlfriend. My name, Eleanor, was nowhere. Not as a main guest, not as an add-on, not anywhere. 8 plane tickets, 8 swamp tour passes, 8 seats reserved at the restaurant. I was not a guest. I was a ghost. I zoomed in, my hand trembling slightly on the mouse. Maybe it was a mistake. A separate booking, an oversight. But there were no other attachments, no secondary confirmations, just the cold, hard finality of 8. That evening, Sophia called, not Leo, Sophia. Her voice was a symphony of forced cheerfulness. "Eleanor, just calling to check in." "We're getting the last of the packing done," she chirped. "I hope everything is settled on your end, financially. I think that final payment for the estate is set to clear tomorrow, right?" I let the silence hang for a moment before I spoke, my own voice softer than I intended. "Is there anything you'd like me to bring for the children?" A pause. It was sharp and brittle. "Bring?" she echoed, the cheerfulness faltering for a fraction of a second. "Oh, no. You don't need to worry about bringing a thing," I pressed gently. "I was just thinking about some games for the flight, or their favorite snacks. I know Leo used to get terrible motion sickness." She cut me off, the steel returning to her voice, wrapped in its usual velvet glove. "Eleanor, we have it all completely handled. You've done so much already. Really, we were thinking it would be a good chance for you to just rest. Stay home. Focus on yourself for a change." The dismissal was so clean, so complete, it was almost artistic. They had planned my exclusion from the very beginning and were now framing it as a kindness, a favor they were doing for me. After we hung up, I walked to the heavy, fireproof lockbox I kept in my study. Inside were the founding documents for the Louisiana Legacy Fund. The account I had created. The account I had funded. The account from which every single reservation was paid. I flipped through the pages. There, in bold, unmistakable print, account holder, Eleanor Vance. Authorized users, none. I opened my banking app on my laptop. The balance glowed back at me. $32,450.19. Status, active. Linked. Cards, 6. Primary billing owner, Eleanor Vance. They hadn't just forgotten me. They had erased me. They had wielded my generosity like a weapon against me, spending my love and my money with the supreme confidence of the entitled, assuming I would be too meek, too grateful for whatever scraps of affection they threw my way, to ever protest. I was never meant to be on that trip. I was just the bank. But the thing about banks is that they have business hours, and they can close. That night, for the first time in months, I slept soundly, without dreams. There were no dramatic phone calls, no tearful accusations. I simply made myself a cup of peppermint tea and sat in the chair Richard used to call his thinking chair, staring out the window as the first hints of dawn painted the sky. In the profound silence of the house, Something inside me settled. It wasn't calm. It was stone. I opened the banking app again. I scrolled to the legacy fund, my name still there at the top. Account owner. I reviewed the 6 linked cards, one for the estate rental, one for the airline, one for the concierge service, and 3 more for incidentals, food, excursions, private tours, all of them set to draw from one source. Mine. I clicked the Account Settings tab, and there it was, a simple toggle switch. Freeze mode. A small note beneath it read, "Activating this setting will immediately pause all outgoing charges. Linked cards will be disabled. No new transactions can be authorized without manual verification from the account owner." 1 click. That was all it would take. But I hesitated. I wanted to be sure. This wasn't a decision made in anger. It was a boundary being drawn in steel. Once you stop playing the role of the endlessly benevolent matriarch, you can never wear that mask again. So I gave them one last chance. I sent a simple, soft text to Leo. "Thinking of you all. Let me know if you'd like me to bring some of my beignets for the kids' breakfast before you go." An hour passed. The message status changed to read. Silence. Another hour. Still nothing. No thanks, Mom. No, we've got it covered. No acknowledgement at all. Just the vast, echoing void of my own invisibility. That's when I knew. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a statement of value. I was the vault, and they were simply making a withdrawal. I returned to the banking app. My finger hovered over the toggle for a single heartbeat. Then, without a tremor of hesitation, I clicked. The icon turned a decisive blue. The status updated instantly. Freeze mode activated. All linked transactions are now suspended. There would be no warning email sent to them, no alert, no text message. They would discover their predicament the same way I had discovered mine, in a moment of cold, public, undeniable silence. I leaned back in my chair, the stone inside me feeling less like a burden and more like a foundation. This was not revenge. It was a correction, a realignment of reality. They had chosen to travel without me. I was simply choosing not to fund the journey. Over the next 2 days, I said nothing. When Sophia posted a photo to her social media of 8 matching monogrammed sun hats with the caption, "Bayou bound, #family only," I didn't comment. I didn't even flinch. And when my granddaughter sent me a breathless voice note, "Nana, we're going to see the alligators," I saved it, pressed the phone to my heart for a moment, and then returned to my laptop. I opened a new document. This one wasn't a budget or an itinerary. It was a list. I titled it, "The Matriarchs." At the top I wrote, Genevieve, Iris, Clara, Beatrice, women like me. Overlooked, underestimated, and overdrawn. And beneath each name, I began to imagine what a vacation could look like. Not as a reward, but as a restoration. Not out of pity, but out of a shared, unspoken power. If I was going to be the one holding the checkbook, I would be the one who decided who was worthy of the trip. They left for the airport, with that soft, smug air of people for whom the world has always bent. The Uber, the check-in, the security line, all documented on Sophia's Instagram story. I watched it unfold from my kitchen table, sipping chicory coffee from a chipped mug Richard had given me. Then, at 8:17 a.m., the first message arrived. Leo. "Hey, getting a weird error with the rental car. Card declined. Can you check the fund?" I took another sip of coffee. I did not reply. 5 minutes later, "Mom, seriously, the concierge just called. The payment for the house didn't go through. It's saying funds unavailable. What did you do?" The calls started then, frantic and incessant. I let them go to voicemail. "Mom, it's me. Please just call me." The kids are getting upset. Another one, his voice strained. Okay, I don't know what game you're playing, but it's not funny. Sophia's mom is asking a lot of questions. Then a low, urgent whisper. Mom, if this is about the text, I'm sorry. Okay, can we please just talk about it? Please turn the account back on. An apology born of inconvenience. A negotiation, not a confession. I kept the phone face down. At 10:15 a.m., an email landed in my inbox. The subject line, Booking Cancellation, the Devereaux Estate. Dear Ms. Vance, as per the notification from your financial institution regarding a freeze on the account holder's funds, your booking has been canceled. Associated charges have been reversed. As the sole account holder, no further action is required from you. We hope to welcome you in the future. I read it twice. A small, bitter breath of release escaped my lips. They would not be welcomed. Not there. Not now. The refunds began to trickle in 2 days later. The estate, the concierge, the airline fees, the private chef's deposit, the swamp tour. One by one, the debits on my statement turned to credits. The Louisiana Legacy Fund, once drained by a sense of obligation, was full again. But this time, I would spend it with my eyes wide open. I opened the notebook with the list of the matriarchs. I made 6 phone calls. Each one started with a hesitant hello and ended in stunned, tearful disbelief. You want to take me where, Eleanor? Clara whispered, her voice cracking. To Louisiana, dear, for a week. All expenses paid. But why me? Because you matter, I said, the words feeling truer than anything I had said in years. Because someone should. I booked the Devereaux estate under my own name. One sprawling, magnificent house, 7 women, 7 days. I called the concierge and asked for separate, luxurious beds for everyone and one enormous dining table. Then I went to the box beneath my bed and retrieved the laughing photograph of Richard. I had it enlarged and framed, not in gaudy gold but in dark, rich walnut, wood that grows more beautiful with time and pressure. When we arrived at the mansion, the air thick with the scent of jasmine and wet earth, I walked through the grand double doors and placed Richard's photograph in the center of the mahogany dining table. No one asked me to move it. No one suggested it was in the way. It was simply honored. That night, we sat under the soft glow of gas lanterns, the sound of distant jazz drifting through the open doors. Genevieve told stories of her travels in the 1960s. Iris, a retired nurse, made us all laugh with tales from the hospital ER. We didn't talk about the children who forgot to call or the husbands who had left. We talked about the lives we had lived. We didn't compare our scars. We celebrated the strength it took to earn them. 3 days after we returned, my skin still sun-kissed and my suitcase still smelling of plumeria, an email from Leo appeared. Subject, clearing the air. I read his carefully constructed narrative of excuses, Sophia's stress, the kids' confusion, the financial bind they were in after having to book last-minute motels on credit. Then came the final, stunning sentence. So, I was just wondering if you might consider returning the original deposit we gave for the trip, or even part of it. I know you're probably hurt, but we're still family. The deposit, as if they had contributed a single cent beyond their own assumptions. They weren't asking for reconciliation. They were asking for a refund on my pain. They wanted me to cover the cost of their betrayal. I leaned back in my chair, the silence of the house a comforting blanket. I thought of the 7 of us on the veranda, lighting a single candle each night by Richard's photo. Each woman saying one thing she wished she had known at 30. You are allowed to rest. You do not have to earn love. Your story matters. I thought of Leo's email, a document devoid of accountability but full of expectation. I thought of the years I spent making myself smaller so they could feel bigger, the years I spent funding their joy while they curated my exile. Understanding does not require surrender. Love without respect is just a cage. I moved my cursor over the email, this final, pathetic attempt to turn my love into a transaction. I did not hover over reply. There was nothing left to say. If you have to explain to someone why their cruelty has a cost, they will never understand the currency of grace. I dragged the message to the trash and then emptied it. I went to the kitchen and poured a glass of iced tea, looking out at the wind chime Richard had hung from the old oak tree. A breeze stirred it, and it sang a few clear, perfect notes. I had not received an apology, but I no longer needed one. I had something far more valuable. I had clarity. I realized I hadn't been left behind. I had been set free, free from the crushing weight of unreciprocated love, free from the performance of a motherhood that demanded my disappearance. The truest legacy isn't the money you leave behind, but the wisdom you refuse to abandon. It is the quiet, unshakable knowledge that you are the estate, the fund, the entire damn legacy. And you get to decide who is worthy of an invitation,